Well, hello all. And again, it's a pleasure to have each and every one of you with us today. And again, our topic for this day is the 1950 census that was released on the 1st of April of this particular year, a very interesting census. What does the 1950 census? And again, I'm going to give you an overview about the census in its entirety. Let's see what it tells us. But first, let's take a look at the history of the census. Its purpose, obviously, in 1790 was to visit every household, complete the schedules, and then aggregate the results. That was under the direction of Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State. And the marshals took the census in the 13 original colonies, plus districts of Kentucky, Maine, Vermont, and the Southwest Territory, which is now Tennessee. As we talk about the evolution of the census, initially only heads of household and the numbers of others in the household were initially recorded. All occupants in the household were identified from 1850 on. Now, again, we talk about the regular census that we're talking about a little bit, but there are also other censuses that have been taken called supplemental. The 1890 veteran census, which is the only one that is available in most of its entirety, looked at the census of Union soldiers and widows of the Civil War. They're also on pension questions, on military questions, on other censuses. The 1840 Revolutionary War pension census, for example, was a census of the pensioners for Revolutionary Military War service. It talks about their names, ages, residence, and was returned by the marshals under the act for taking the sixth census. The 1865 special census asked about state, county, town, township, or city and ward and district in cities, and the material of which the dwelling is built and valued. We'll return to this kind of topic in just a minute. There's a thing called the agricultural census that still continues today. It started in 1840 and is a census conducted every 5 years by the National Agricultural Statistics Service, and provides comprehensive agricultural data for every county in the U.S. And it's a complete count of farms, ranches, and the people who operate them. The census looks at land use, ownership, operator characteristics, production practices, income and expenditures, and others. This, when compared to earlier censuses, helps to measure trends and new developments in the agricultural sector of our nation's economy, which is a major sector in our economy. Another one that is of great interest to genealogists are mortality schedules. They were taken in 1850, 1860, 1870, 1880, and 1885 in applicable state censuses, and it included information about the people who had died in the year immediately preceding the census. And you can see the kinds of questions that were asked. Again, name, age at last birthday, sex, race, marital status, a biggie, professions, occupation of trade, where the person lived, or the country of birth of the person or the parents, the length of residence in the country, the month in which the person died, and the disease or cause of death, or the place where the disease was contracted, if not at the place of death. And an interesting one here is the name of the attending physician. So again, as you go through these topics, you can do some more research relative to what you find here. Now, the key question for us is, why a U.S. Census? Really, there are 6 key factors. Talking about apportionment. And again, state population counts are used to reapportion seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, and we just went through that. Redistricting. So the local and state officials redraw congressional, state, and local district boundaries. And again, we're going through that right now. Money to states and localities. The census helps to determine the amount of funding state and local communities receive from the federal government for the next 10 years. Planning. Info from the census provides a wide range of government, business, and non-profit decision-making capabilities. The biggie here, emergency response. And again, detailed population information is critical for emergency response in the wake of disasters. Better understanding how the communities are composed helps the federal government in particular to respond in a national emergency or a local emergency. Now, it's also a base for federal surveys, and it provides a population base for other federal surveys. Now, what about the 1950 census? And again, it was released the 1st of April. A key thing is 72 years after it was conducted. We're going to look at what information is requested, what are the supplemental questions, what's the difference between the 1940 and 1950 census records, how to search it and where. And I want to point out it's the last of its kind with tremendous detail. Other censuses after that do not have this amount of great detail. Let's take a look at what kind of information is requested. Now, from 1850 to 1950, 6 basic questions were asked in each census: name, age, gender, race, occupation, and place of birth. Now, the relationship to the head of household was asked from 1880 to 1850, and the citizen status was asked from 1890 to 1950. And the nature and the number of additional questions has changed over time. Again, you'll see the census itself is a quick snapshot of time to gather information about that period. We'll take a look at the major differences between the 1940 census and the Form P51, and I'll explain that. The 1950 census of population and housing, and that was a standard fill-in-blank form used in most of the continental United States, the 48 states. In comparison, let's take a look at what was asked on the first census. In 1790, the marshals listed the name of each head of household and asked the following questions: the number of free white males aged under 16 and of 16 age and upward, the number of free white females, the number of other free persons, and the number of slaves. Now, as you start looking at the differences between the 1940 and the 1950 census, the 1940 census, the key thing here was each page had lines of 40 people. In the 50 census, this was reduced to 30 lines in order to ask sample questions and also provide a space for the enumerator to add additional information. In 1940, only 2 people on each form answered sample questions. In 1950, 6 people on each form were asked to answer the sample questions, and the 6th person answered several additional questions. In 1940, everyone was asked whether they had lived in the same place, same county, or same state in 1935. In 1950, only the persons on the 6 sample lines were asked what county and state or foreign country they lived in a year ago. That means 1949. In 1940, everyone was asked the highest grade of school they had attended, and if they had attended school since March of 1940. In 1950, only persons on the 6 sample lines were asked about the highest grade they attended and whether they had completed that grade, and whether they had attended school at any time since February 1st of 1950. In 1950, everyone aged 14 or over were asked if they had worked or had been assigned to work on public emergency work for agencies such as the WPA, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the National Youth Administration during the week of, notice, March 24th to 31st, 1940. The key thing here is those agencies were abolished during the 1940s, so the question was not asked again in 1950. In 1940, everyone aged 14 or over was asked the amount of wages or salary income earned during the calendar year of 1939, and whether they had received income of more than $50 from other sources, other than wages or salaries. In 1950, only persons on the 6 sample lines were asked the dollar amount earned or received in 1949, whether they're working in his or own business, profession, or farm, or from interest, salaries, veterans' benefits or allowances, pensions, rents, or other non-wage or non-salary income. So it was a vast amount of information about how people were working and earning money in 1940. In 1940, 2 persons on the sample lines were asked if they had a Social Security number and whether deductions had been made from their wages or salary in 1939 for old age insurance or railroad retirement. This was not asked in 1950. In 1940, persons on the two sample lines were asked what their usual occupation was and what industry had it been in. The answers to these questions could be the same or different than the person's current occupation or industry reported on the main part of the form. In 1950, only the person on the last sample line was asked his or her occupation in their last previous job in the industry in which it was occurred. In 1940, persons on the two sample lines were asked if they were a military veteran, wife or widow of a military veteran, or child under age 18 of a military veteran. In 1950, only men on 6 sample lines were asked if they had served in the military in World War II, World War I, or any other time. I do want to point out, we're in the period before the Korean War. So again, you're looking at a particular war time frame. Now, in addition, those people who on those 6 sample lines were asked how much money their relatives in the same household received from the same sources. And if they did not feel comfortable in doing so, the enumerator gave the person a form that could be directly mailed to the Bureau of Census. The enumerator was to record $10,000 plus for anyone who reported an amount more than $10,000. Now note that the average family income in 1950 was $3,300. I do want to point out that in 1960 and after census will not be as data rich as this one. Now let's take a look at the census forms in the 1950 census. The most common is the form P1. It's a census of population and housing. Population information was on the front, housing information was on the back. I do want to point out something interesting about this census. 2 years after the census was taken, it was all microfilmed for the census of population, and the paper copies were destroyed. The housing copies, the information was aggregated into statistics, and that paper information was also destroyed. But there are other forms. The P2, the individual census report, again, for an individual, could be mailed directly to them and they could pick it up. Form P4, cruise of vessels report. We're talking about merchant marine ships. We're talking about American flag ships. Form P5 specifically refers to military people overseas or civilian contractors working for the military overseas. So again, whether it be in Europe or Japan or the Philippines or any place else, that's what that was for. The V8 was the Indian reservation schedule, and P10, 11 were different forms for that particular census that were used elsewhere. But there are others. You've got 12A, which was specifically a household schedule, P80, American Samoa, and 81, the same thing. 82, Alaska. You notice Alaska was not part of the contiguous 48 states. So 82 and 83 talk about census information derived from those two reports. 85 and 86 talked about Guam and the individual census report. Remember, those individual census reports were quite often given to people in rooming houses and other places too, or left in some cases for people to fill out. 87 and 88, Hawaii. 91, 92, the Panama Canal Zone. 93 and 94, Puerto Rico. 97 and 98, the U.S. Virgin Islands. So again, why do we have so many different reports? The key difference was the question on race and ethnicity. In the continental U.S., the race abbreviations included white, Negro, American Indian, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, and all the others were spelled out. In Alaska, it was different, slightly different. You had obviously white, AL for Aleutians, ESK for Eskimo, IN for Indian, Chinese, Filipino, and Negro or Black. Also has asked questions about Japanese people, Chinese people, and Filipino people. Other races were spelled out. The population questions were very, very similar in the Alaskan census as in the continent of the United States, but there were some differences. Both forms had space for 30 people, but the Alaskan form last sample questions. Instead, several sample questions from the P1 form were questions for all persons on the Alaskan P82. Guam, for example, again, different abbreviations for race. You had CHA for Chamorro, again, W for white, F for Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, Negro, and Negro mixed, and other. Now, the form's basic population and demographic questions were similar to those asked in the 48 contiguous states, but fewer questions were asked. There were no sample questions for people, and few questions concerning the characteristics of the inhabitants' housing, that backside form. Instead, both sides of the form contain spaces for 25 people. So again, very, very limited additional questions. In Hawaii, another territory at that particular time, it was a two-part question relative to race. First, they had a standard of abbreviations, HA for Hawaiian, Caucasian, Chinese, Filipino, and Puerto Rican, and then the designations of all others would be written out in full. And another question was asked: is this person of mixed race, yes or no? Now, the form and its population questions, again, were very, very similar to the other forms, and both forms had spaces for 30 persons and included several questions asked only of persons on sample lines. So again, there were differences in these forms, and this is just an example of some of them. Now, this is one that I hadn't mentioned before, the Form P3. I've never seen this one before. It was an infant card for children born between January and March of 1950. And the purpose was to study or compare the number of infants registered at birth and not enumerated against those enumerated and not registered. You can see the comparison. Now, here's the sample questions on the P3 infant card. And again, residence, name of infant, race, sex, is the father enumerated in the household? And again, a series of questions: name of the father, age of the father, his last birthday, occupation, industry of the father, date of birth, notice the post office address of the usual place of residence for the infant's place of birth, and the actual place, not the usual residence, the name of the hospital. If no hospital, the name of the attendant, for example, a doctor, midwife, or other. Again, children could be born at home. The maiden name of the mother. This is one of the few times you'll find that maiden name on the P3 card. The age of the mother on her last birthday. The education of the mother. We're talking about the highest grade of school, and did she finish this grade? And then the birth order of the child, first, second, third, etc. And notice that information on 12, 13, and 14 are unique to this card and are not found on any of the schedule. Now, the questions on the standard form P1. When you take a look at the questions for all persons: address, house and apartment number, serial number of the dwelling unit, this house on a ranch or farm, this house on a place of 3 or more acres. Then it asks the question about an agricultural question and number, the name of the person, relationship to the household, the sex, the age on the last birthday, race. But notice the marital status. We're talking about married, widowed, divorced, or separated, the state or country of birth, and the naturalization status if foreign born, or AP for people born of American parents overseas. Now, this is an interesting section here. This one talks to questions for persons 14 years of age and over. Was this person working, unable to work, keeping house, or doing something else most of last week, the week prior to the interview itself? If the letter H or OT is listed, the question was asked: did this person do any work at all last week? Which is a very fair question. If no, was this person looking for work? Again, trying to gauge the status of the workforce itself. If no at item 17, even though he didn't work last week, does he have a job of business? For example, if you're on vacation, you have a job of business. If work at item 15 was yes, or yes at item 16, how many hours did you work? So again, a key thing talks to those issues. 20, what's the occupation? What's the industry in which the person worked? And then a key question here is the class of worker. We're talking about a private employer, a government employee, you own your own business, without pay on a family farm or business. Now, for persons on the sample lines, there's 6 lines per sheet. Was he living in the same house a year ago? Was he living on a farm a year ago? Was he living in the same county a year ago? Again, trying to check migration and living patterns. If no in 23, what county and state or foreign country was he living in a year ago? What country were his father and mother born in? What is the highest grade of school that he or she has attended? Did he finish this grade? Has he attended school at any time since February 1st? Yes or no, or over age or age 30 or over. A situation here would be a 16-year-old who attends school. He again would be answering questions like this, but again, he would still be attending school. Now, questions again for persons on the sample line. If yes, item 17, how many weeks has he been looking for work? In 1949, how many weeks did he do any work, excluding work around the home? In 1949, how much money did he earn working as an employee for wages or salary before taxes and other deductions? In 1949, how much money did he earn working in his own business, professional practice, or farm? Last year, how much money did he receive from interest, dividends, veterans allowances, pensions, rents, or other income, excluding salary or wages? 1949, how much money does his relatives in his household earn working for wages or salary before taxes and other deductions? In 1949, how much money did his relatives earn in their own business, practice, or farm? Last year, how much money did his relatives earn from interest, dividends, veterans allowances, pensions, rents, or other income, excluding salary or wages? If male, did he ever serve in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War I, World War II, or any other time, including present service? Yes or no? So again, all this interesting aggregate data. Now, in 34, it talks specifically to the enumerator. If the person worked last year, is there entry in any items? If yes, skip to 36. If no, make entries in 35. So 35, what kind of work did this person do in his last or previous job? What kind of business or industry did he work in previous jobs? Again, what is the class of the worker in his previous job? Private employer, government, etc. 36, if ever married, widowed, divorced, or separated, in item 12, has this person been married more than once? Interesting question. How many years since this person was last married, widowed, divorced, or separated? If a female, and the question was, and ever married, was she widowed, married, divorced, or separated in item 12? How many children has she ever born, not counting stillbirths? That's a tremendous wealth of information there as you go through and look at it for an individual. Now the question comes up, how do you use the 1950 records? Because at this present time, the forms have just been released and are not fully indexed. Remember, these forms, when you take a look at them, are handwritten. So again, you can recognize the problems of transcription taking place as you try to index this form. So how do you use them? The very first thing you're trying to do is find the enumeration district. And one way of doing it is use the ad, find the address that your parents or the person that you're looking for lived at. Then within the enumeration district, use the name finder if the address is not known. I'll show you that. I do want to point out that if you have the interest, you can help with the transcription and the indexing. Now, a key question comes up now. How do you search and where? Now, these are the best search sources: census.gov, archives.gov, ancestry.com, myheritage.com, family search, and the last one, stevemorse.com, is a tremendous help in locating enumeration districts and the use of the census record itself. Let's take a look how to do that now. Here's an example. I'll just show you data from this, then show you how to use the form. Let's look for the Brothers family. My grandfather, Lewis Owen Brothers, and my father, Alfred S. Brothers. He's a senior, but it doesn't show that on the form. The enumeration district is 15-702 in Boston, and the addresses were 143 and 145 Harrison Street in the city of Boston in Suffolk County in Massachusetts. Now, this is the census record, but let me pull up a little bit of information for you. When I pull it up and look at it with the lines, you'll see here, my father, race, male, age 30, married, born in Massachusetts, weekly employee, a real estate broker, and self-employed. My mother, Edith I, wife, again, race, female, 26, married. Oops, let's go back here. Oops. Married, again, at home, age, that was it. Now, for me, I now show up for the first time in the census. And notice it says junior. It doesn't say senior about my father, but it says junior about me. And again, talks about race. I'm a male. I'm 7 years old, and the enumerator had to say that I was not married in Massachusetts. And my sister, again, who's the daughter, again, the same thing. I was 7, she was 3, and both of us were born in Massachusetts. But I do want to point out that right down below here, something very interesting. You see the name of Edward W. Brooke as a Roomer, his wife Remigi, and daughter Ramey. Okay. This is the former Senator Edward W. Brooke, who my father served under in World War II in his company. And again, he's 30. He's from the District of Columbia, weekly employee. He worked 40 hours, and he's a lawyer. He's self-employed. His wife Remigi, notice she's born in Italy. And again, staying at home. His daughter, Ramey, again, she's 1 year old, born in Massachusetts. Then down below, and I'll show you why I say that, is my grandfather, Lewis Owen Brothers, again, head of household, 58. He was born in Canada. And it says England, again, trying to distinguish Canada from the French side and the English side. Again, a weekly worker. He's working as a cook in a restaurant for 40 hours. My grandmother, Martha, and her info, Lewis R. Brothers, his son, again, he was a adjustment clerk in the Veterans Administration. He worked 40 hours a week. And Adrian Weich, again, my cousin, again, is listed as the granddaughter here. So it gives you some insights of what's going on here. Now, this particular line here, which talks about the questions below, are for persons listed on the sample lines. I'm just indicating one. And this one is for my uncle Louis, S12s. He went through the 12th grade and everything else. It talked that he had earned $5,096 a year. Remember, the average salary was $3,300. So it gives you some insights as you look at these forms, what other information you can glean. Now, what are the reflections for me for this record? I found my immediate family at the addresses listed. That's where we lived at that time. This is the first time my sister and I are listed in the census. As I pointed out, Ed Brooke, former U.S. Senator, and his family lived with us before purchasing his home a number of blocks away, and the occupations of my family members are listed. Now, how do you find census information in the 1950 census. The very first thing is try to locate your family address or the family name and location as you're looking for. Now, the next site is one of the best sites that I have found. The census website at 1950census.archives.gov. Then you try to find the enumeration district and find the census record or page for the family or person. Let me show you how you do that. Now, when you go to that website, this is what shows up. This is the welcome site. You have two sides of it, begin search and resources. We'll start with the begin search sign. And again, they have tips for searching in the search site itself. It talks about location, state, city, county, and the name, okay? And you notice it's underlined up on top in red is search. As you continue to look at the form, again, as you look on the time, we talked about location. You can put a name in, and you can put in, if you happen to know the new enumeration district number, you can put that in. And again, the tips for searching the census talks about how you do it. First and last names. You can select multiple filters, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Let's continue here a little bit here. At the top, you can also select resources. That was the other side of the first page there. And these are some of the resources: forms, questions, instructions, external resources, district maps, census information and training, school data that was published. But the one I want to point out here are finding aids. And then right below the Native Americans in the 1950 census. Let's find out what we can find out about finding aids. There are a couple different types: geographical finding aids, enumeration district maps, and again, below is really information relative to those. But at the very, very bottom is something that is of tremendous use. It talks about Stephen P. Morse's 1950 search engines. And it talks about a whole different host of things. But the one I really want to look at, because I came from a large city, was obtaining streets within enumeration districts for the 1870 to 1950 census in one step. And this talks about large cities, okay? When you come to this first screen, when you select that, this is what you come to. This is the screen. You have to select the state and select the city, and I did that. Then the next thing you do is select the Unified ED Finder, Enumeration District Finder. This is what this page looks like before you actually go in and fill it out. It talks about entries, much of the data in 1950, as you know. So again, it talks about state, county, city, or town, house number, street. Let me show you how to do this. I'm gonna fill it out here and let you see what it looks like. I've got the state, Massachusetts, the county, Suffolk, Boston. I'm using my grandfather's street number, 145 Harrishop. The key thing here is, if you click on it, it lists all of the streets. And so Harrishop in either numerical or alphabetical order. You just pick it up. And so how do you better define the area or enumeration district that you're looking for? Now, what are the cross streets and back streets that complete the block that I lived on? Okay, these are the streets: Walnut Ave, Townsend Street, and Harold Street. So again, there may be a fourth one if you want to, but I want to show you first what shows up. This is a Google map. It shows exactly where the house is located. It's the exact house. This is Walnut Ave. This is Harrishop Street, Townsend Street, and this is Harold Street. This is a picture of the house. Again, okay. The key thing here is, interesting, that's 145, that's 143. We lived upstairs in a two-family house, and my grandparents lived downstairs. So again, if you're lucky enough, you get a new view or picture of the house itself. Now, coming back, and if you use the census image viewer and I use NARA. This for me was the better version. You can also use Family Search or Ancestry, but I'll show you why I use NARA here. What shows up? when I look at that viewer, again shows up the state of Massachusetts and the enumeration district 15-702. The state, city, and county. And notice there are 19 pages for this enumeration district. So what do? Okay, it talks about, this is Ward 12, where I lived was Ward 12, and how it's bounded. And the district consists of the following blocks, 9 and 12. So now what do? You hit the population schedule. And this is what shows up, the one I showed you. And again, as you work your way through each one of these respective images, image 6 is where my folks are located. I'll show you a little later on exactly what it is. Now, in summary, there's a long history of census records and data from 1790 to today. The census has evolved over time. There are differences between the 1940 and 1950 census, and the information in the 1950 census can be a great goldmine for us. There are very, very detailed questions and builds a fantastic picture of that particular community for that individual. But I do want to point out, comparing data in different censuses can give us insights into our family over time. And before I get into questions, I want to show you something else here very quickly. Okay. This is the actual census page here, blown up a little bit so you can see a little bit better here. And again, you can see the headings of it. That makes it a big deal difference. So as you take a look at it, I knew the Vaughns. And they live right next door to the house, to the right of the house itself. Again, as you see the form itself, this is what it looks like. And again, what happens is the street numbers are listed here, and here itself is the actual name of the street itself. So again, I do want to point out here, there's Leonard B. Johnson here, stepson. He's in the armed forces right now. So again, there's quite a bit of information here. I want to go down to this bottom picture here. The questions listed. So again, if you have the opportunity to get a hold of a great form, the person on this line 5, his father and mother were born in the British West Indies. And again, highest level of school, 12th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade. Notice here on this last line, 30, father and mother are from Russia. So again, there's quite a bit of information down below. Also, for district use, there's more information down here. So again, there's a whole host of information here. And the amount of money people are making, money made in the household, and the like. So again, there's a tremendous wealth of information in these forms. And at this time, I just like to open it for questions. Again, I hit you with a fire hose. So again, what I was doing here was to try to provide you more information than we received just on the P1 itself. You notice that there are many more forms. Your relative may not have been annotated in the P1 itself. They may be because they're living in a different Alaska, Hawaii, Guam. They will be listed very, very differently. But again, you've got an idea in terms of the kinds of information that you can find there. Please, are there any questions? As I said, I've hit you with a fire hose here. Awful quiet. At a later date, I'm going to provide a presentation on the statistics gained from this aggregation of data from the census, and talk more to the information on housing. Show you the forms that were there as well. And I might point out that the forms themselves no longer exist, but again, we do have sample forms. Everybody's awful quiet.
Hello, Al. This is Doris.
Hi, Doris.
Hi. Quick question. You showed an area that's more populated, more central for people.
Yep.
What about the rural area, like in
Uh,
Alabama and places like that?
You'd go into that same form, except on the left-hand side that I showed you, that had the name, location, and the like, and that's where you'd look for it. You look again, for example, small communities, they might be included in very, very large enumeration districts. But again, if you put the name in and the location, for example, a community itself, you might be able to find it that way. The other thing would be go look at if you at a map of the area of the enumeration districts in those areas, and then pick an enumeration district that seems to include the area in which your family lived, and see what you can find there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. As you can see, again, from other census, there are many more forms than just the simple P1 form, even on the 1940 census. But again, we tend to focus on the P1 here because the greatest number of people were involved in the continental United States, and that's what that form was for. But you notice it was a form for our American Indians as well. So again, as I say, depending upon the makeup of your family, it's interesting to see how things come up. Remember, people did overseas fill out those forms and send them in. We have people living and working overseas who are not working for the military, but they themselves got forms and were able to fill those out. And those were all individual forms that they received. They could have gone to, in this case, a local embassy or something along the line and actually gotten a form from them. And then either returned it to the embassy or mailed it in. Any other questions? As I say, that this was a fire hose here. The goal was to provide you a greater overview of what these forms in these censuses do. And remember, the purpose, as I listed all the purposes of the census, information was aggregated and statistics were derived from all that aggregated information. And that's how decisions were made for the next 10 years. Is there anything else you want to see on the forms themselves? Let me go back and see if I can find something else for you here. Okay, give an example here. Well, I won't be able to do it. I was going to show you a sample form of the overseas form in the, what do you call it, vessel form. Thank you, Jane. Thank you for joining with us. And again, this is just a quick way to give you information in terms of how to search these census records. Over time, again, they'll be indexed and they'll be easier to search as far as that goes. But again, with the key thing here is knowing the name of the person that you're looking for in the general area in which they live. And as Doris pointed out, if they live in the rural area, again, the key search strategy there is finding out, again, the enumeration district. And each state had, there are state maps for, again, with the enumeration district listed for the states themselves. And if you can find the location that your ancestor lived in an enumeration district, that's the way to search.
Dr. Burgess,
Go
this
ahead.
is Doris again. You gave a number of websites to look at prior to the Stephen
Sure.
P. Morris. Can you go back to that, please?
Oh, sure. Well, let me call up my presentation again. Sure. Happy to do so. I think I went too far here. Let's see, check to be sure here. Where it's located. Oh, okay, I was going the right way. And as I pointed, the one that really surprised me was the infant form. That here it is, Dora. Again, because I had not seen that before. It's a very valid question. Again, because a child may have been born and not yet registered. You know, again, in a community, particularly a rural community, and so again, he or she might be enumerated, but not registered.
Thank you.
And these, as I say, the census.gov is because that's the Census Bureau website, archives. And again, I showed you that's the one I use. Ancestry, MyHeritage, and Family Search are all good tools. Again, if you have access to them, take a look and see how they contrast or compare. And SteveMorse.com is fantastic in terms, as I showed you, of locating enumeration districts and also using the census record data itself. And Jane, again, you can go to our website, or else you can, again, get a hold of me at alfred2142@gmail.com. Again, when you go to the website and like, there's information relative to our current staff as far as that goes. And Cheryl asked a question, okay? And of people, I know that Agent has done searches, and Cheryl asked the question, have you been able to find everyone so far in your searches? No, I haven't. I answered no, and it's my grandmother who lived down the street on Harrishop Street at 96 when I was growing up. But I'm trying to, but I just didn't see her immediately in the search. And remember, the transcription may be the last name was Yates, Y-A-T-E-S. It could be Gates. So I've got to do further searches to see if I can find her. And her husband, my grandfather, passed away in 1944. And again, she and her daughters or other part of the family may have gone back to DC for a short period of time. I know my mother was here as far as that goes, so I suspect they're there, but I'm unsure. I've got to check the address again, addresses or possible locations to see where that family is at that time. And Adrian, have you been able to find all the members that you've been looking for?
No, I haven't. I'm still looking for my great uncle Jackie, and my grandfather.
Okay. Have you had success in finding the enumeration districts?
Yes.
I know one of the key things that I'm recognizing, and again, others have mentioned, is again, the misinterpretation or the misspelling of names. Again, you may be looking for things and you can't find it because it's not spelled as you expect it to be spelled. Thank you, Jane, and happy Easter to you too. Linda or Doris or Cheryl, have you done any searches? I'll give an example of one of my running buddies here who just came back when his wife just came back from Florida. He was looking for his family in California in a small community, and the community name was not listed. So he had to use the strategy that I was mentioning, find the enumeration district and then work through the respective pages for that enumeration district. And he did find them eventually. Adrian, do you want to add any comments or insights in terms of your search?
I don't know if you had mentioned it, but we have to remember too that in order to be enumerated on the 1950 census, you have to be born before April 1st, 1950. I know a lot of people have been, well, my people were born in 1950, how come they're not showing up? Because you had to be born before April 1st, 1950 in order to be enumerated on the census.
Good point. Very good point. Yeah, my wife made it there too. She was born in 47, so she made it. And again, I was able to find her family in Newton, Mass. Yeah. I think one of the interesting things that I recommend you do is use that Google search on that page for Steve Morse and see if you get a picture of the property. Carol, that's a very quick. The question is, what locations, city, towns was that infant form used? I can't answer the question. I don't know specifically. I don't know how that was used any way, shape, or form at this point. If my suspicion would be, if I were a enumerator, I'd go up with those forms, and if there were a baby there, I'd ask that question. So, so again, they should have a whole bevy of forms with them as far as that goes.
So Al, it's Cheryl. So it was more likely the enumerator decided, but they would have had it with them, but they only would use it if they saw a young child there.
Or they might ask any female there, were there any kids under the in this age range, or born this year. And that's what I recommend. I have not looked at the instructions to the enumerators, and I apologize. But that's where how these forms were to be used would have been addressed.
Are we going to be able, and you were talking about mostly it does the P1 form, which I'm familiar with, but these other forms that you were saying, I sort of understand that with the territories.
Sure.
But like with the infant form, are we able to get that from what they're doing, or is that going to be more difficult to try to search? Because I asked that question because, like, when I did the one family line that I did 1910 and 1900 and 1910 census, one family lived in 2 different counties during that time.
Okay.
And there was a difference in the number of children.
Okay.
And I found that they had 5 children died during that period, and they're all under the age of 5.
Wow.
And the reason I found the difference, and then I started trying to find what the children's names were, or if they were all stillborns or infant deaths. And like I said, they were in 2 different counties during that period. So I had to look at 2 different counties. And here in Michigan, we had a website, and we still do, it just got renamed, where you can look up the death certificates to a certain period. And that's how I was able to find the death certificates for the children. And in turn, I found where the children have been buried, which was in 2 different cemeteries also.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah.
So that's what I'm wondering. I mean, sometimes it's harder to find, especially if they don't. I like the one census where they did say how many children they had and how many were still living.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, and you don't have a lot of people that knew that family, really closely, sometimes you're missing, especially children.
That's true.
Especially in rural areas too.
True. I'm gonna have to do more research on the P3 to find out. I know it has a statistical basis, but I'm gonna try to have to find out where it's located, in that situation as well for that P3 form.
Yeah. Also, I would be interested if we would be able. I understand the statistics, especially that sort of like with the mortality schedules. That helps you in the death records, and it does more specifically on how people die than sometimes the death certificate even does. That's but true. I would be interested if we would be able to get access to some of that information, if we would be able to search, at least to see if some of my surnames would be under any of that.
Okay, that's a task for me, Cheryl. I'll see if I can find out.
I would appreciate it, Al. Thanks.
It's a very valid question. Again, because typically the forms that we see here are typically the P1s. But you notice you have a whole bunch of other forms, that should reside, on archives.com. So I've got to find out where they are.
Yeah. Well, I went to the website Thursday with Kurt showing the other type of forms. I knew about the mortality and the veterans, but he showed all other types of schedules that we could look for. And now I'm interested in how many other forms out there are, and if we're able to ever access them that help to broaden our searches for our families.
What I'm gonna do, the very first thing when I get finished here, Cheryl, I'm gonna go on Google and say, where are the P3 forms? And they may tell us, you know, in a broad sense, because it should be able to give me an answer. And the other questions are where are informations on the vessels, for example? Is there a listing of because remember what happened was, on a particular vessel, I'm talking about a merchant ship or an American flag ship, each person, American citizen on that ship, had to fill out a form, return it to one of the officers. The officers put all the information in an envelope, and when they got to port, they sent it off to the Census Bureau. So consequently, you're trying to find out, you know, where are these forms located? They should be on microfilm someplace, but I have to figure out how to find them.
Yeah, you would have to have an idea of whether or not somebody was in like the service or not during that time period to even consider that.
You know, see, my grandfather prior to that had been a seaman. He worked on coastal ships that went up and down the East Coast, up to Canada and down to Florida as a chef. In the 1940 census that indicated it, but notice that in 1950, the one I showed you, he now was actually working in a local restaurant. So he'd come off the ships at that particular period of point in time, and it had become land-based. So yeah, that's true. And the other question is were any of your relatives, for example, in the military at that particular period of time? And if so, if you know where they're located, you might be able to find out, you know, how they fill out the form. I was in the military for 22 years, and I obviously lived either on or off base, but during the census periods, I lived off base, and I filled out a regular census. So they came over, you know, and interviewed my family relative to a regular census. So on the census form itself, it talked about, you know, if you're in the military or not.
With that, you were saying merchant ships, but would that include like people that worked in the military in the Coast Guard section? Would that include them too in that area?
It would depend upon whether they're overseas or not. For example, remember I showed you there's an overseas form that included the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and the like. Again, if they were deployed overseas, if they're deployed and lived in the United States, they would be recorded on a regular P1 form.
Okay. Thank you, Al.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for joining with us for African American Genealogy Society of Fort Wayne, and enjoy the sun out there right now. I appreciate it. Thank you.